trains, offering quick and easy ways to get from place to place. However, your journey might not be as you'd expect, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Number 1. In order to really paint the picture for you of the scariest event I have ever experienced in my life, and to really feel that moment when my blood turned to ice in my veins, I've got to give you a little bit of background information of my rather unconventional and screwed up childhood. I'll try to keep this part brief. I'm sure this will sound like utter bullshit to some, but I assure you that it's not. I'm telling the absolute truth, even if it does sound like a badly produced after-school special. My father kidnapped me from my mother when I was a baby, not because he loved me and couldn't live without me, but because he's a sociopath douchebag that wanted to hurt my mother as much as he could. I was missing for roughly 6 years, with my face on the back of milk cartons, the whole nine. My father was an ex-military survivalist that smuggled drugs over the Mexican-American border, amongst other things. During the most formative years of my development, I was surrounded by criminals and raised by this neglectful tard. I had a lot of severe trauma very young. Let's just say that I knew what real monsters were. By the time I was located and returned to my mother, just after I turned 7, I knew how to load, clean, and assemble several different types of guns. I knew to aim for the head of the men wearing blue uniforms, and I was a damn good shot with a handgun. I had been left alone for days at a time, repeatedly and often, so I was completely self-sufficient, and I could care for myself. I didn't go to school, and had only been around other kids for very rare brief moments in time. I was a feral little beast at this point. I did not trust adults, or anyone for that matter. In my experience, most people were liars and did not show you their true face. Luckily for me, I was returned to a loving home with my mother and stepfather. With love, therapy, and protection by the two of them, I think I turned out to be a relatively normal and surprisingly mentally healthy woman, albeit with a few idiosyncrasies. Now, the point of all this preamble is to give you some context regarding the kind of person that I am. I am not a victim. I do not take shit from people. And there are very few things in this world that truly terrify me. I am a survivor. Growing up the way I did, I studied people intensely as a defense mechanism. I am very good at reading people and their emotions. At times, even the feelings they won't admit to themselves. I've been left with an obsession for my security and of those I love, so I tend to be hyper-vigilant of my surroundings. There is always a weapon of some kind on my person, or in my belongings wherever I go out, and I take note of every exit and entrance of any place I step into. As a teenager, my stepfather taught me a few tricks on how to take someone that was bigger and or stronger than I. He was a hell-raising biker, and at one time a bartender and a bouncer at rowdy biker bars, so he knew his stuff. You would think I would be prepared, right? The story that I am trying to get to here was one of the few times in my adult life that someone slipped through all my defenses and nearly got to my young daughters. Now, it's one thing to fear for your own safety, but to fear for the safety of your children as I'm sure every parent knows, is something else entirely. It is ice cold, blood-curdling, absolutely sheer and terror, and I never, ever, ever want to experience it again. I was living in San Francisco roughly 7 years ago. At the time, I managed a medical office inside a large residential drug rehabilitation center. The residents were a mix of characters ranging from the homeless and mentally ill to straight out of San Quentin paroles. I actually enjoyed my work and never felt unsafe there, but it was exhausting. It was Friday at the end of a 50-hour work week, and I could not wait to get home and put my feet up. The building I worked in was donated by the Catholic Church and used to be an old convent. It's a 4-story stone behemoth, and I ran up and down 3 of those floors all day, every day that week. It had been a rough week, and I was deep to the bones tired, as well as mentally fried. It was no quick commute home for me, however. My job was in Fillmore, and my babysitter lived near Balboa Park, while I lived in the Sunset District next to San Francisco State. The fastest way home involved walking 2 city blocks and to catch a bus, which would drop me near the closest underground station. From there, I'd hop into a train that would take me all the way across the city, nearly at the end of the line. At least the babysitter didn't live far from the line, so I didn't need to transfer to another bus. Once I had my girls, I would have to wait for the next train to head back down the M line, and finally, a 15 to 20 minute trek on foot to the back of my small city-sized apartment complex. I had made it to the babysitter's house, uneventfully, and stood waiting for the next train, counting the minutes down until we would be at our front door. This was an above-ground stop, so my habit was to hold the hand of my 7-year-old and heft my 3-year-old toddler on my hip, clamber up the steps, and carry her through the train to find a seat. Although she was able to walk, she wasn't so balanced on a moving subway train, as well as being a toddler. She also tended to fall over and become easily distracted by other people on the train. Strollers seem to be more of a pain in the arse than they are helpful when dealing with public transit, so this had become my routine. Looking back, I'm sure I looked like an easy target. It's not like I present as this badass, hardened and grisly person. There's really nothing intimidating about me. I knew I had balls of steel, but unless you challenged me, no one else would know. I was a 27-year-old, exhausted single mother, just trying to get home with my kids and belongings in tow. We were on the final leg of the journey home, and being so tired and wiped out, my defenses were down. So when I managed to get up the stairs onto the train and realized that the car was empty, except for one homeless man, I did not feel it was worth to continue through the train cars to a more populated one. I observed this guy and quickly took mental note of him, as was my habit. He was at the end of the train in the last car, right next to and opposed to the door I entered from. He didn't look to be something I should be afraid of. Remember, I worked with this population every day, and I knew that most of these people are nothing to be scared of. In my experience, most of these guys just had a shitty life, followed by a series of bad decisions and/or an inability to learn from their own mistakes. In fact, when I was traveling on my own, it was a habit of mine to sit down in the empty seat next to a homeless person so long as they didn't appear intoxicated or schizophrenic, that no one else would take, and strike up a conversation. If you ever want to see true joy in the eyes of another human, sit down next to a homeless person and talk to them like a regular person. You will make their day. But I digress. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, unkempt shaggy hair and scruffy facial hair, wearing several layers of raggedy stained clothes, with an oversized coat that hung past his knees. He had a tall can of beer in his hand, but didn't seem to be overly attentive to my presence. Even though this man didn't set off a fear response for me, I was not in the mood to deal with an intoxicated hobo with my girls tonight. So I headed up the train, hoping I'd make it onto the next car before we started moving. Unfortunately, we had no such luck. Being the only group that got on the train at this stop, the train pulled off quickly, and I had only made it to near the end of the car, balancing a tot on one hip and holding the hand of the other, and all the weights of the bags and purses on the shoulder, and I just kind of dropped and wilted into the empty seats. We were next to the front of the car. We didn't have to go far now, and I could see from my vantage point 2 people in the car ahead. I was in the habit of placing my girls on one seat to situate bags, and I always sat in the aisle seat as a protective measure. While we are getting settled and the train gets going, I hear this guy in the back start singing to himself. I honestly don't remember what. I just remember that he seemed happy. I had filed this man away in my brain as just another homeless guy riding the train at night on loop to stay warm, which they often did. Most of the time they didn't bother anyone because they didn't want to get kicked off the train. I figured he had panhandled enough that night for a beer and a ticket, and I did not begrudge him a little joy and warmth, as long as he stayed away from my kids. As I'm sitting there, attending to my girls, kind of half aware of the hobo in the back, I slowly register that his singing is getting louder, more boisterous, and closer. I glance over my shoulder to see that he is hobbling in our direction and looking at my toddler, who is peeking at him over the back of the seat as she's sitting on her knees. I start to pay a little more attention to his whereabouts, but again, there's nothing that says to me that he's dangerous. I have no problem enforcing boundaries with strangers in public, but I also have a lot of compassion for these guys. After all, with a couple of different turns in my own past, that could have easily have been me. It's apparent this guy has had more than one tall boy that night, as he is insult and swaying and slurring his words. But he appears to be singing for my little tot, because she is tickled pink, giggling and smiling, the more animated his singing becomes. I study his face, but his smile doesn't seem creepy to me at all. He honestly didn't seem like a possible Chester to me, or have any ill intent. He just seemed to be entertaining an adorable little girl. Maybe he had kids of his own somewhere that he missed, or maybe he was just lonely. Even so, I didn't want to engage with this guy and encourage him, so I was paying a little more attention to what he was doing now out of my peripheral vision. By this time he'd made it pretty close to us, and he dropped into the bench seat that was a couple of rows and on the opposite side of us, approximately 7 feet away. We were sitting in the forward-facing seats at the front of the car. Now I was wary, but still not afraid or skeeved out by this guy. He starts chatting to me at this point. In his slurred speech he says, "Beautiful family you got there. You're a lucky mum to have such cute kids." I am so not in the mood to talk to anyone right now. But, as I said, I have too much compassion for people down on their luck. So, I just politely say, "Thank you," without turning around. He's still slurring. He launches into a tale about how the family he used to have and everything that went wrong in his life. It doesn't seem to matter to him that I'm not really engaging, but he's not coming any closer to us, so I don't stop nor interrupt. Now what happens next is my first inkling that this guy may not be what he seems. It's not so much what he says that does it, but the sudden shift in tone and personality. He's not slurring anymore. The volume of his voice dropped a bit, and the tone of his voice changes to this Hannibal Lecter smugness. He's not talking to me anymore, but to my tot, who is peeking at him over my shoulder. "Hello, little girl." Now this has my full attention. Every cell in my body is telling me to pay close attention to this guy. I look over my shoulder to look directly at him and really assess his demeanor. His joviality seemed to be gone, and I didn't see a happy hobo anymore, but a leering grin on his face that doesn't reach his dead-looking brown eyes. He is looking at my littlest tot, but then shifts his eyes to look at my 7-year-old, who was also staring at him, although looking far less entertained than her sister. This is the moment that my blood runs cold. In the same Hannibal tone of voice, still not slurring, he says, "Oh, aren't you a pretty one? Such pretty white skin. So sexy." I'm looking directly at him when he says this, and what I see in his face terrifies me. I do not like the way he is looking at my daughter, looking at her like she's a piece of meat. He realizes I am looking at him and shifts his eyes to look at me now, and grins a little wider to show me a perfectly white, intact smile that seems incongruous with the rest of his getup. I also notice that while his attire is dirty, he seems pretty clean, and his scruffy facial hair has a distinct line, as if he shaved it that day with purpose. Now, maybe I'm just paranoid due to my past. Maybe this guy had gotten free dental work. Maybe he had showered and a shave, but had nothing clean to put on his back. Maybe he had gotten a free shave from a barber. There are plenty of plausible explanations for what I observed. But it's when I lock eyes with this guy that alarm bells go off in my head. What kind of a man calls a 7-year-old sexy? And why did his demeanor seem to change so suddenly? And why did he seem perfectly sober? I have absolutely no doubt this man is a predator. My intuition, which I trust completely, says get the hell away from this guy now. All of this goes through my head in nanoseconds. I stand up to pick up my bags, adrenaline surging. I heft the little one back up top my hip and grab the hand of my eldest and head for the door of the car, because I want the 2 people in the car ahead of me to hear. I wait for the doors to open before I turn back to him, and loudly, with Mama Bear authority, I say, "You stay away from us." I didn't care if I was wrong in my assumption, and I didn't care anymore if I hurt his feelings. I lumber to the front of this car, and again sit in the very frontwards forwards seats. I don't go any further, because this happens to be a long train, with probably 6 or 7 cars, and I don't see anybody on the next couple of cars from my vantage point. I want to stay with the other passengers. It's not unusual for the train to be this empty, this far away from downtown. especially at this time of night between the commute rush and the Friday night club crowd. I'm used to disembarking alone, or with very few others at my stop, when I work this late. I'm starting to panic at this point about what I could do at my stop coming up. It is also on the part of the line that is still above ground, and I'm not going to have a crowd of people to get lost in. This creep could easily follow me on my walk through the complex, and either attack me alone or follow me home. Because I'm pondering my predicament, and literally terrified, I don't immediately register that the people who are in the car with me have gotten off the train, and I am now alone again. Several minutes go by, and we're getting closer to our stop, when I hear the whoosh of the car doors opening behind me. Please be another passenger. I'm praying to myself before I look behind me. Nope. It's the creepy Hannibal hobo heading towards me again, but this time he's glaring at me. No more smile, no more singing, no more slurring. Just an evil glare as he plods in my direction. He's got his left hand up on the overhead bar. With his right, he seems to be holding something inside of his jacket as he plods towards me. My stomach drops in my toes, and my heart leaps into my throat. We are all alone several cars behind anyone I can see. I don't wait to find out what he's got in his jacket. I hadn't set down my bags this time. They still were over my shoulder, and I was holding my youngest. So I grab the hand of my oldest and tell her we need to get to the front. I can tell she's scared now too, but I'm trying not to frighten her too much. I kind of push and pull her gently in front of me, thinking if I can get her to the front, even if it's empty, I'll be right behind the conductor. I'm going as fast as I can, which isn't very fast with everything I'm juggling. As I'm nearing the doors again, I can see the next car is empty, but the next car has people. I'm almost there. As long as he doesn't catch up to us, we should be safe. We are now almost to my stop, and the train is slowing down again. I hear the doors swishing open again behind me. Shit. I glance over my shoulder to see this guy is running towards us. I have never been so terrified in my entire life. I move ahead as fast as I can and into the next car, but I know I'm not going to make it to the one filled with people. And no one seems to be looking this way from the car ahead, and the train is pulling into the stop. This is the moment when time seems to slow down. I think this guy plans to incapacitate me, with no hands to defend myself, and then he's going to run off the train with one or both of my girls. Now my adrenaline is surging, and I can feel my heart thump at warp speed. I drop the bags from my shoulder, not giving a shit about what's in them now. I need free movement. I tell my 7-year-old to stay behind me as I squat down to plop the youngest on the train floor. In one motion, I turn around, raise up, pull my pocket knife out of my back pocket, and flip it open, taking a wide-legged defensive stance. I don't know if it was the security of my knife in my hand, or that one final surge of adrenaline, but I swear to God, as I stood up, I grew. I felt like Mario having just gotten his mushrooms. I felt invincible, 3 times my size and superhuman. No one was going to get through me or to my babies, even if I was going to get stabbed. He stopped dead in his tracks when he sees the knife, about 5 feet in front of me. I sway a bit with the brake on the train, bringing it to a halt, but keep my footing. Without thinking, I scream at this guy, "Take one more step, and I will cut off your balls and choke you with them." I see his eyes widen at this. He obviously did not expect this kind of reaction. He looks at me in the eyes, looks at the knife, looks behind me at the kids, and one more time glances back at my eyes. Then he turns tail and runs out the open door and off the train. By the look of it, they hop into my car and immediately hop off. Probably because I'm standing there looking like a psycho with a knife out. I hear the ding and swoosh of the doors closing again, and the train moves on. At this point, I kind of just crumpled to the floor and hugged my kids, and I burst into tears. My oldest was crying too, and her little sister was just completely bewildered. I didn't move from the floor until we pulled into the next stop at West Portal, where we disembarked, and I called my roommate and best friend. He was the man with big biceps and uncanny strength for his size. I wanted him to meet us at the train stop, so we didn't have to walk through the complex alone in the dark after all this craziness. Which of course he did, because he's amazing like that. I never stayed on an empty train again after that. No matter how tired I am, I will move to a car full of people. I never saw Hannibal Hobo again either, and I don't care to. I don't think he ever wants to meet me again either. Number 2. This happened to me about a month ago, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. The day after Black Friday, I was working later hours than usual, because retail life. I made plans to walk home from work with my 2 guy friends, since we all live together and work for the same company, about a mile away from each other. Fortunately, I was able to get a ride from a co-worker to the train station, where I was going to meet my friends, avoiding the almost mile walk to the train station through the drug-riddled and crime-heavy area. When I arrived to the station, I texted my 2 friends that I was there and was going to wait on the platform, since I didn't want to loiter outside on the street so late at night. They said they were finishing up and would meet me on the platform soon. Once underground on the platform, I leaned against a wall and just generally looked around and watched people, since I didn't like being on my phone in a very crowded place. It was past 11:30 p.m, but the place was still packed with Black Friday shoppers, finally heading home for the day. Trains were becoming less and less frequent, and I was getting a bit annoyed that my friends weren't there yet, since each train coming was around 15 minutes apart. Finally, one was arriving in 5 minutes, and my friends texted me that they were on their way and would hopefully make it onto the next train. I started lining up, expecting to make the next train coming, when someone behind me put their hand on my shoulder. I turned with a smile on my face, assuming it was my friends greeting me. Wrong. It was an older man, maybe in his 60s, about 3 to 4 inches taller than me, who was bulky with a scruffy beard, and wearing wrinkled, neutral-toned clothes. Naturally, my smile began to slip, but he had already caught my friendly disposition and took advantage, releasing my shoulder and standing so close to me that I took a couple of steps back from where I had started lining up and ended up next to the wall that I had originally been leaning up against. He reached out his hand for a shake, and on autopilot, I stuck mine out as well. He clasped my hand with both of his, all the while smiling and saying, "Hello, what's your name?" I was caught off guard, and not necessarily worried, just annoyed for allowing myself to begin this interaction. I responded half-heartedly with, "Amanda," and he still didn't let go of my hand. Never dropping the smile, he goes, "Amanda, you are beautiful. How was your Thanksgiving?" At this point, I yanked back my hand and stuck both my hands in my front pockets of my jacket. Where I live, stuff like this occasionally happens to me, so I've become better at dealing with it and giving non-committal answers that hopefully won't encourage nor anger someone who may be unstable. I responded with a "Good, thanks," and stopped making eye contact, looking around and trying to see if I saw the train or my friends coming. Unfortunately, the man was not deterred. He started cupping my elbow in his hand, asking me for more questions about where I was from, where I lived, where I was going, what I was going to do that day. I'm generally a nice person and didn't know how to stop the flow of conversation. I did see two guys notice what was happening, and when we made eye contact, they both looked away, like they hadn't noticed what was going on. Finally, the train was approaching. My friends hadn't made it yet, but I didn't care. I was praying that this man was getting on the train. As it started pulling in, the man goes, "Is this your train?" I tell him no, that I'm waiting for friends, which he definitely thought was probably just a line I was feeding him. "No matter," he says, "let's take it together. Come on." The man, still holding my elbow in his hand, begins to gently tug me towards the train. I keep saying, "Sorry, this is my train. I'm waiting for a friend. This isn't my train." But I'm starting to freak out, because nothing like this has ever happened to me. And I'm also panic laughing, because I don't know how the hell to get out of this. The train stops and the doors open, as people from the platform start crushing in. The man starts tugging me harder towards the open door, and I'm freaking out. At this point, I keep saying, "This isn't my train," and trying to yank my arm, but he's gripping it tight. And, unfathomably, I'm trying not to make a scene. Probably because I'm in shock that something like this is happening. So I'm starting to move towards the doors against my will. I'm starting to think that maybe I'll just get on the train and jump off at the next stop. I'll text my friends to meet me there. I'll pretend someone is calling me. I'll sit next to another stranger on the train. Anything. And then the greatest thing I've ever heard in my life. My friends were shouting my name. They had arrived at the platform and saw me from a distance, that some random stranger was holding on to me. I yanked my arm away from the man, who had loosened his grip when he saw that I really did have friends, and I darted at them, just as the stranger jumped on the train as the doors closed. As the train pulled away, my friends asked me who that man was, and I just started crying, because I had definitely almost complacently gotten onto a train with a complete stranger because I was too scared to say no or make a scene. My initially bewildered friends gave me a hug after and vowed not to be late again, just as I vowed never to go alone on the train again. Number 3. This happened 6 years ago. At the time, I was 17 years old and living in the biggest city of Switzerland. Probably the safest country in the world, but still, this has happened. So it was a Saturday night, and a friend of mine had just turned 16 that very day. He decided to celebrate his birthday in a well-known bar in the old town of the city. As you may not know, you're allowed to drink alcohol at the age of 16 in Switzerland. So, we were having a great time that night, drinking and partying. My friend, whose birthday it was, got incredibly intoxicated due to the sheer amount of drinks that he was offered. He decided to head home from the party pretty early, but in all fairness, he was absolutely smashed. Me and two of my friends didn't want to call it a night just yet, so we went out for a smoke through the back door of the bar. After we finished, we realized we had drunkenly shut ourselves out, and we had to go all the way around just to get through the front door entrance again. As we were making our way back to the entrance, more of a stagger than walking, we passed this old shady looking dude. In my drunken state, I even bumped into him with my shoulder, but carried on walking anyway. After we hear him shout, "Stop," and other things, which I can't quite remember. We, quite puzzled by his sudden rage, just stood there in the middle of the walkway, trying to rationalize his outburst. I mean, it was just a bump on the shoulder. I didn't even hit him hard, nor was it intended. As we were standing there, he started speed walking in my direction. I assumed he was going to curse me or whatever, but I was very wrong. He started throwing fists at me. His punches didn't hit me that hard, and he wasn't even aiming for my face. I took one hard punch to the back side of my ribs, and that's when one of my friends pushed him away. I collected myself, and we gathered in front of him. He was just standing in front of us, shouting that we have no respect for the elders and that he was going to kill us. This guy was nuts and probably high, and he was frantically shouting at us, and we realized that he had a knife in his hand. We then booked it out and went back into the bar at hyperspeed, adrenaline pumping through our veins, and because of that, my drunken state suddenly cleared up, and I started to feel a pulsating pain at the point he'd hit me. As I wanted to touch that spot, it felt wet. I took my hand out from under my shirt and saw blood. Adrenaline rushing again, I hesitated and took off my shirt in the middle of the bar. By the reaction of the people around me, I could tell something was wrong. They took me to the toilet so I could see for myself, and I had a big wound on the back of my ribs. It was bleeding, but to my surprise not that heavy. Still, I was in a bit of a panic and did not know what to do. We were concerned because we'd also smoked weed that night, and I was afraid that they'd drug test me, so we decided to head for the train station and grab the first train home instead. We get to the platform, and who do we see? There's the guy again. Fortunately, the train was only a few minutes away, and we sort of have this stare-off from the other side of the platform. I was absolutely crapping myself, thinking that at any point, he'd figured that he wasn't done with me quite yet, and wanted to go again for round 2. Thankfully, the train pulled up, and we got in different carriages. However, when he noticed that there was next to no one on the train, we could see through the window him slowly getting closer and closer to our carriage. At this point, I wanted to just get off at the next station to avoid this whole hassle, but the trains were running quite infrequently at this time of night, so I was scared that I was going to be stranded in the middle of nowhere with a stab wound and nowhere to go for several hours. And I wasn't actually sure how bad the stab wound was, but I didn't think it was enough to kill me. That half-hour train ride was the most nerve-wracking and utterly terrifying ride of my life. I just sat there in silence, holding a shirt over my stab wound, hoping to hell that he didn't come any closer. Thankfully, he got off a few stations later, and the relief that surged through me has never been matched to this day. When I finally arrived at my parents' house, I woke them up, telling them what happened and that I took a knife to the back. They were understandably up in no time, and the only thing my father said after he saw the wound was, "A band-aid'll do." My mother, on the other hand, wasn't having any of it and drove me straight to the hospital, where they sounded the depth of my wound, and they said I was very lucky indeed. Little more to the right and it would have punctured my lung, me probably drowning in my own blood. Police then came to the hospital and I had to give them a statement. I told them everything I could remember. I even had to go to the police station again the next day, and to my surprise, they had a collage of mugshots prepared. I could identify this old guy right away. Obviously, he was already registered, and they even told me he stabbed another guy the same night. Shortly after, we met again in court. I can't remember what he was sentenced to, and it doesn't matter. Karma got him anyway. After some time, 2 or 3 months or so, I received a letter explaining the death of my attacker whilst in prison. So, yeah. Thanks, Karma, for doing your thing. I'm glad I won't ever have to meet this sick guy again. Number 4. This occurred roughly a year ago, while I was on the train from Seattle. I've taken the train a lot through the country, and I've never had any experiences with weird people on the train, as they are usually quite friendly. At least, until this guy. Also, at the time of this story, I was a 24-year-old male. We were almost at my destination when this guy, probably in his late 20s, short and with thinning hair, asked if anyone was sitting in the chair next to me. There wasn't, and I said he was welcome to sit there, although the question was sort of weird. There was only me and one other person on this particular train car, so he could have chosen anywhere to sit, but whatever, I thought. Maybe he was just friendly and wanted a chat. At first, his questions were pretty innocent and normal, as far as making conversation goes, but he quickly started asking rather personal questions about my dating habits, preferences, things that I liked, but nothing downright creepy just yet. I figured he was a gay and was just being extremely direct and perhaps a little bit too much. So I flat out told him that I wasn't gay, and he told me that he knew and that it was okay and that he just wanted a chat. And that's when the conversation crossed the threshold and went into full-on creepy. He started talking about what he liked, which wasn't so much his likes/dislikes, but more of the disturbing/creepy weird fantasy world. Something about a heaven-like world where he was the ruler king of people, which basically involved boys performing sexual acts on him and other people so that he could watch. Periodically, he would ask me if I was into something like that, and of course the answer would be no. I should have just gotten up and walked away. But my stuff was all around the seat, and I really didn't want to just leave it there. He kept talking, and eventually just went into this state where he was talking about this fantasy to himself, as if I wasn't even sitting there. Once he started getting graphic, I told him I had to get up and just walk to the bathroom. I stayed there for a few minutes, and when I came out, he was sitting next to the other guy who was in the same car. Apparently, that other guy got the same talk, since he walked past me not only a few minutes later shaking his head in a what the hell kind of way. About 10 minutes later, we were pulling into my stop, and people were standing by the door to leave. From the other end of the train car, a conductor started walking towards us and walked past this creeper who was just sitting there by himself. The conductor looked at him and said, "What are you doing?" in a tone that sounded more sarcastic than serious. But the conductor took his radio out and said, "Can we have the police meet us at the station? There's a guy completely naked that's masturbating on the train." Number 5. I am a female in my early 20s, and I live just outside of a big city. One night over the summer, I was hanging out with a friend in the city until late at night, at around midnight, and then we separated to the different trains that we needed to get on in order to get back to our own homes. I was riding on my train, minding my own business, not really paying attention to anyone around me. I was sitting across from two men, facing them. They were probably around 40 or 50, and I was paying no attention to them. So that is all that I could really say about them. Other than that, I did hear them speaking to each other in another language, which was apparently Polish, but I didn't know that because I'm terrible at languages. They got off at a stop, and then this older lady moved over and sat right next to me. She said to me, "Do you speak Polish?" And she had an accent, so I thought maybe she needed to ask me a question and didn't speak much English or something. So I said, "No, sorry." She then started telling me that the men across from me took my picture, and she had seen them do it to other girls before. She went on to ask, "Do you ride this train every day?" When I said that I hardly ever rode it, she said, "Well, that's good." She was just acting really weird, but I felt like she knew more. Probably because she understood what they were saying. But then we got to the next stop and she got off before saying anything more. I got off a few stops after that, and I know that it's totally illogical to think they would have been out there or something, but because they had no idea where I was getting off, plus they wouldn't even had time to get there. But still, it was super freaky, and I definitely major speed walked to my car. I've only ridden the train a few times since then, but every time I have, I felt really paranoid, even though I know the chances of seeing them again are slim. Number 6. The other week, I was coming home from school in Boston. I grew up 30 minutes south of the city and could get there easily by train. This line on the Boston subway, or the T, was usually empty on the weekday nights, especially in the winter. This night, I had gotten off campus late and had just made the last train home. After running in the windy winter city which is Boston to make the train, I was pleased to sit down in the warm trolley. So I threw off my backpack and put my feet up. I shut my eyes in total relaxation and planned on napping for a few minutes. But to my misfortune, I was woken up by a hearty chuckle. I sat up in my seat and noticed that at the end of the trolley, there was a woman sitting in one of those seats. The lady looked odd to say the least. She had bright orange hair and was really thin and in a perm. She wore this ultra blue eyeshadow with red lipstick that made her look a bit like a clown, and she was obese. Had to be at least 250 pounds standing at 5'3" and maybe in her mid-40s, and to me, it looked like she was laughing at her own reflection from across. Needless to say, it creeped me out, so I decided to stay away, even though I was damn tired. Periodically, I would look up to check to see what she was doing, but every time I looked, she was just staring across from her at the reflection of herself in the window, sometimes chuckling, sometimes smiling. 20 minutes into the train ride, my eyes started to get extremely heavy, and I started to drift off, snapping awake at times, not even realizing I'd fallen asleep. I was completely unnerved by this lady and didn't want to fall asleep, but I did. I woke up to the sound of the train screeching around a turn and immediately looked for her, but she was nowhere to be seen. She was 2 seats next to me, staring at me. I jumped out my seat from shock, and she stood up with me, still looking at me with this smile and chuckle. My backpack was still on the ground, and I pulled it over with my foot and threw it back over my shoulder. I moved to the end of the cart, and she followed very slowly. It was the last stop, my stop, and I pressed myself against the door like a scared child, wanting it to open so badly. It opened, and I flew out of there and into the garage to get my car and get the hell out of there. For now, I'm all set taking the last train home. Number 7. This happened to me yesterday. I was on the subway with some friends returning home after a long and adventurous day. It's around 11 PM or so, and we get on the train, and there are a few cute girls sitting down. My friends, being naturally ladies' men, go over and strike up a conversation. We're all having a nice chat with the girls for a few subway stops, when a very dirty homeless man gets on the train and slumps himself on the floor against the side of the train straight across from us. He just stares at us with a super creepy, soul-piercing look, like he was looking for something, but I didn't pay much attention to him. A few minutes later, the conversation with the girls slowed down, and my friends and I go find some seats further up the train, as we'd been standing the whole time. About 5 minutes go by, and the girls scream and run up into the seats across from where we are. I asked them what happened, and they explained that they noticed that the homeless guy had been shifting something around really oddly under his blanket. The girls kept their eyes on him, and out of nowhere, he pulls out his junk, obviously pleasuring himself, and continues staring at the girls. That's when they jumped up and ran over. Just then, the man makes his way up the train. I didn't notice him coming up until we sat in the seat right behind me and started breathing on my neck. He starts making some super weird noises when I turn around shocked, and he starts whispering, "You have some pretty girls. Very pretty girlies. I need some of those pretty girlies." My friends and I took the girls up and fled to some seats facing the opposite direction so we could watch the man. He was still very obviously touching himself under the blanket, and we all decided to get off at the next stop and get on the next train going in that direction. I wonder what could have happened if we weren't talking to the girls, as there weren't very many other people on that train. Number 8. I was picking up my sister from the airport using the train system in Japan. It was pretty late at night, so the trains are pretty empty. Whole rows of seats are empty. So when a boy in his late teens comes in and actually asks me to move over in my seat, I become instantly suspicious. I move way over and sit at the end of the row, but he scooches next to me as close as physically possible. He says something to me in very broken English and I ignore him. He says it again, and I tell him in Japanese to leave me alone. He smiles and says his name is Takashi and that I am very pretty. He says my breasts are very large and that he wants to touch them. He asks if I'm married and on the Navy base. I tell him once again to leave me alone very loudly in English. I get up and move 3 train cars up. I can hear him moving behind me, following me. I sit down and he's next to me again. This time I'm getting nervous. He starts trying to touch me, and at one point grabs my hand and holds it in a very tight shake. When I pull it away, he laughs and smiles, staring at me. I'm not necessarily scared, but angry. The next stop is coming up. I bolt for it. I get off the train and he follows. Just as the train is about to pull back on, I jump from the platform back onto the train. The doors close behind me, and he stands there watching, smiling, and waving. When I text my friend what happened, she called me back immediately. Apparently it was the same guy who'd been sexually harassing, touching, and following people from the same Navy base gate. The command had informed women of his name because there was nothing further that they could do. Even after this arsehole got punched, he was still following people around. It could have been worse for me, but if I see him again, I think he's the one who is going to be in trouble. Number 9. Last night I was coming home from my friend's house. I was waiting for the last train at 10:50, pretending to listen to music because my phone was dead, so hopefully no one would try and initiate a conversation with me. Even though there were only about 3 people at the station, and 2 of them were asleep, this guy comes up and tugs on my headphones and tells me that I would be a very lovely model, and asks me if I would like for him to take some pictures of me with my camera so that I can set up a portfolio, and tells me that with Caitlyn Jenner being so famous, transgender models will be a thing very soon. At this point, I should mention that while my hair is long, I have a semi-feminine face. No one other than my teachers that didn't know me before I started transitioning knew I was trans until a substitute teacher that wasn't informed to call me by my preferred name called me my birth name, and I replied. This guy had no way of knowing whatsoever. He then starts telling me that I have the perfect look for porn and that I'm a very pretty person. I am a 16-year-old emo boy waiting at the train station at 11 at night, pretending not to hear this creepy-ass 30-year-old dude telling me I'd be very good for porn and modelling because of my gender identity. I was terrified to say the least, especially since I passed pretty well. Luckily, the train pulled up right then, and he backed off once he saw that there were 2 cops in the train car. Honestly, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't have gotten on the train and sat across from the cops. Hopefully, I never see the creepy train pedo again. Number 10. About 5 years ago, I was heading back home to Philadelphia from a family member's place in New York City. I had a late evening train out of Penn Station, and for those who have been there, know that many shady characters will often wander. I had just gotten some snacks and was walking back up towards the main train schedule board from the lower levels when out of nowhere I feel a tap on my shoulder. I turn around to see a woman who at first glance looked pretty normal. She was holding an expensive looking purse and had some bright red lipstick on, but upon looking at her longer, I saw patches of her hair were missing, and she was only wearing 1 shoe. She had scars all over her bare arms. She began ranting about how she lost her credit card, and that she had no way to get home unless I give her $100. I was pretty freaked out seeing as I was only 15, so this kind of stuff isn't cool. Her voice was really low, raspy and creepy. I told her, as calmly as possible, that I had no money to give her, and that I was sorry. She then started becoming frantic, scratching her head super fast. She started to walk closer to me, saying that God would want me to help her. I started to back away pretty quickly, but she wouldn't let up. She kept walking slowly and eventually started cursing at me with some pretty foul language. She never got too close though, but she followed me right behind all the way to the stairs, becoming more and more frantic. Finally, I just dipped set and ran, and told a security guard what happened. I saw her being led out, whilst I was waiting in line for my train. They had to hold her pretty tightly, as she was freaking the hell out, jumping all over the place. I hate travelling alone. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Now I have some pretty big news for you. Last year, you might remember I did a collaboration with another narrator called Hitchhiker. He's a really lovely guy, and in my opinion a very talented narrator. Some of you may have noticed that he actually disappeared for a while, but I am very pleased to let you know that he is back under a new name called Horrifying. So, I'm going to leave the link on screen now, and would really appreciate if you could check out his channel. He's a really lovely guy, and I hope that you enjoy his narrations as much as I do. So go check him out, link is on screen now. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.